Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Webcram. This is ISACA Ireland Webcram 2016. This is the third year we've been running these. The goal of tonight's short session is to give you a last-minute turbocharge, a bit of boost on the way to passing your ISACA exams during the September 2016 SIP. First of all, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm just waiting down the left-hand side in the little chat window. If you can hear me, if the audio's working out there in webinar land, you wouldn't let us know by using the little chat box down the left-hand side. And as long as we've got audio, yep, we've got good audio. Thanks very much, Everett. If you have any issues during the session, please do use the checkbox down the left hand side, the little chat box. So if you have any issues or questions, please use that little checkbox. You also have my email address here, so if you do have any questions or any feedback, feel free to email myself or Everett on the ISACA Ireland board, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. Let me introduce myself first of all. My name's Hanna. I run my own information security consultancy business. We're called NEMSTAR. I specialize in information systems, governance, risk and compliance, and cybersecurity. What I really do is I consult and help businesses drive value around some of the main frameworks. So what I'm talking about is COBIT, ITAF, TOGAF, and SABSA. Those are my areas of specialism. What I hope to do tonight is to give you some hints, tips and pointers. I've been delivering training on CISM and CISA for the past 7 years, and I have put over 1,000 people through the CISM and CISA program successfully. So tonight is just my little way of saying thank you, giving a little bit back, trying to help you get that all-important pass in a couple of weeks' time on the 11th of June 2016. So let's get stuck straight in. But first of all, what exams are we about to cover? Because we're going to try to cover more than one exam this evening. We're going to try to cover CISM and CISA, but we're also going to take a small look at CRISC and CGEIT as well. CISM, first of all. CISM is tactical. It's the tactical delivery of a strategy. The CISM is the Information System Security Manager. Our job role, according to ISACA, is to implement, manage, create roadmaps, drive a risk program, drive a value program, drive business enablement, and be able to measure the outcomes of our work. So in ISACA, we have a very clear idea of how information system security and risk should be managed. And we have 4 key players. We've got the manager, the CISM. We've got the auditor, the CISA. We've got the board of directors, the CISO and the CIO. They're into the CGEIT space. And we also have the risk specialist, CRISC. No matter what exam you're studying for, you really have to stop before you even start and have a think of what ISACA's goal is. ISACA's goal is to present you with a management framework, a management system to explicitly bring information security under management control. Our job is a little bit more detailed than maybe other frameworks like PCI DSS or even ISO 27000, because we try to cover all the different elements. We try to cover the auditor role, the executive management, strategic and governance role. We try to cover the tactical delivery, CISM role. And of course, we also cover the risk IT, the CRISC, risk specialist role. So no matter which one you're doing, you've got to remember, you're part of a team. Your team will always have 4 ISACA members in it. Yourself, if you're a CISM, the auditor, the risk specialist, and your strategic governance entity, the CISO or the CIO. It's critical that you understand that this exam, any of these exams, They cannot be taken alone. They're always part of something a little bit bigger. That was CISM. The other thing that we're really here to look at is CISA. Those are the two big accreditations that ISACA is doing at the moment. CISM, tactical delivery, CISA, providing governance entities assurance that the tactical elements being delivered correctly. Exam hints or tips. When you're revising, when you're reading, when you're studying for this exam, you are not working for who you're currently employed with. For the purposes of this exam, we all work for one business. That business, I call it acme.com. Acme.com is our stereotypical American multinational organization. It's a truly governance-led business. It has a CISO who's a qualified CGEIT who preaches from the COBIT and ITAF handbook. We have a CISM. We have the Information Security Manager, responsible for the tactical delivery of the CGEIT's governance and strategy. We then have the auditor who provides the assurance function so that the CGEIT knows that the strategy will be delivered, that will be delivered on time, within budget, delivering the agreed business goals. CRISC, we also have a CRISC working for acme.com. They're the specialist role that conduct our risk assessments. Only when you consider working for acme.com, only when you have all four of those bodies in place, can you hope to understand the ISACA point of view? Can you hope to understand the ISACA exam question? CISA to us is extremely important because they provide assurance. They measure our strategic achievement. They provide the audit function. They measure our strategic achievement. They collect evidence on our strategic achievement. They check the implementation of controls. They provide statistical feedback that the percentage of attacks thwarted, the percentage of attacks that were successful. They manage and audit projects. They deliver forensics, and they're all about ensuring the business gets value for money at every stage of the life cycle. So what we have to open is this concept of an overview of ISACA and the acme.com company. So for every exam question, for everything you're reading, you cannot rely it to real life. Real life comes later. This is about getting you past an exam. Acme.com, 4 ISACA roles working for Acme: our CISO, CGEIT, our Information Security Manager, CISM, our Auditor, CISA, and our Risk Specialist, CRISC. You see, the two big ones that we do are CISM and CISA. And CISM and CISA are not actually that different. You could argue all 4 accreditations are very similar. You could say we're strategically aligned. Now that's an ISACA joke if you get it. CISM is the manager. We implement and manage day to day. CISA is the auditor. The CISA must understand the business needs, must understand the business strategy and the business objective, and the CISA measures our progress towards the strategic achievement of our goals. So CISM and CISA to me are very, very, very similar. In actual fact, if you're about to try one of these exams for the first time, I won't consider that you've completed until you've done the other one. If you're doing CISA this time, you really won't understand ISACA until you also study CISM. And if you're studying CISM, vice versa, you won't understand ISACA until you study CISA. So 2 sides of the same coin, if you like. CGEIT is a little bit different. CGEIT is about building a shared vision, a shared strategy to work towards success. It's all about governance. Governance is about strategic leadership. It's about providing a direction and a path to take. But then it's about leaving your functional managers to continue down that path. Acme.com has two tiers of management. We have an executive management team. The executive management team can also be called the senior management team or the board. So we get an executive senior management team, the board. They're responsible for strategic direction. They have to provide a mission. What is our purpose? What is the goal of information security within our business? They have to provide a vision of where we'd like to be. They always are the owners. They must provide leadership. They show their commitment by providing budget. But they're only interested in the outcomes. They don't want to know the details of firewall configuration. They don't want to learn the OSI 7 learn model. They're not interested in the difference between shell shock and SSL poodle. What they're interested is, what is the outcome for the business? Acme.com, we're a for-profit limited company with investors, with stakeholders, shareholders. So what we're interested at all time is the outcome. In other words, how is this going to impact our profitability? How is this going to impact our long-term survivability? All they're really interested in is the outcomes of our work, because they're about value creation. There are only two types of department in Acme.com: profit centers and cost centers. Profit centers get the bonuses. Profit centers get the praise. Profit centers get the reward. We can never be a profit center. But we also don't want to be a cost center. So really what we try to do is we try to contribute to the value of the business. We shouldn't be a cost center. We should be a contribution center. We should be able to measure and prove how much in financial terms we contribute to the overall profitability, the overall success of the business. And don't shy away from it. We have one mission, one goal, one vision in Acme.com. We're here to make money. Our success and failure will ultimately be measured by our ability to make profit as a business to meet our strategic goals. So Acme.com, a very cold, hard American profit orchestrated business. The other one is CRISC. I mean, ultimately what we're trying to do is create an integrated, holistic view of risk. We're trying to mitigate and manage the risk to an acceptable level. CRISC is a specialist risk discipline. Many of you might do risk. But can I ask you an honest question? Do you have any right to call yourself a risk specialist? You can go to university and study generic general risk for 3 years. At the end of your general risk accreditation, you can study statistical risk methods in your master's. After your 2 years master's, you could go on and do your PhD in information systems risk. You could easily do 7 or 8 years at uni studying nothing but the mathematical discipline, and it's a form of pure mathematics. Risk modeling. You could easily do 8 years at university on risk. Does that mean that you know the same as somebody who studied for 8 years in risk? We in ISACA, we see the risk as a very specialized role. We see this as almost a full-time occupation, something that's complex, something that requires a lot of mathematical modeling and knowledge and an understanding of industry as well. CRISC is a quantitative risk specialist. They specialize in assessing threat levels, assessing impact levels, calculating the likelihood, the probability that it may occur, measuring the effectiveness and the cost effectiveness of controls, looking at the value creation for the business, measuring the residual risk, measuring the risk mitigation, and always again ensuring the business achieves its strategic goals. Can you see a common theme coming through? Value, measurement, business, these are three things that bridge across all four disciplines within ISACA. We're about ensuring the business achieves objectives, about measuring the value that we deliver, and measuring our progress towards achieving that value. All of these exams are based on the same base knowledge, the same core knowledge. We need to understand governance. We need to understand risk, compliance. Governance, risk, and compliance is absolutely fundamental to all four exams. You've no chance of achieving a pass unless you're extremely confident that you understand exactly what governance, risk, and compliance is, not inside your business, not from ISO 27000, not from PCI DSS, not from the Data Protection Act. You must understand governance, risk, and compliance in acme.com. We then have to zoom in the details. If you've done any reading or revision at all, and 2 weeks away from the exam, I really hope you have. COBIT and ITAF are two of the foundation frameworks that we have within ISACA. ISACA exists because of COBIT and ITAF. COBIT is control objectives for IT. It's CISM, if you like. ITAF is the IT audit framework. It's CISA. COBIT and ITAF are two fundamentals behind everything we do. Our exams, we like to think in ISACA, we're uniquely management focused, uniquely business focused. We think tools like PCI DSS and ISO 27000, we like to think of tools like that being too prescriptive, too technology driven. We're very much driven by a business. Each one of these, and of course the way we implement things is controls. Controls mitigate risk. I'm not mentioning controls very much because I'm assuming that all of you get into CISM, CISA, CGEIT or CRISC. All of you are in this space because of controls. What I'm trying to make you realize is controls are bottom of the list. They're bottom of the list. They're the least important thing to us. The other things drive our controls. The other things measure our controls. The other things dictate which controls we should use. Each one of the exams focuses on a different area of specialism. The one that covers all three areas is audit, CISA. CISA is, in my personal opinion, the most difficult of the three, because your goal as a CISA is to understand the other three roles, understand how the other three roles deliver business value, and to go in and measure the value creation from the CGEIT, the CISM, and the CRISC. The one saving grace is the foundation is shared commonly across all four exams. If you know the common basics, then and only then can you move on to the unique requirements of each exam. So what I'd like to do for a bulk of this evening's presentation is talk about something you're all very clear about, you all understand really well, something really easy, like governance. So let's start off with some easy questions. What is governance? Where does it come from? Who owns it? Who's first? You see, when you're asked the question in that way, all of us have an idea what governance is. All of us have an understanding of governance. But can you actually answer those questions? You see, what I would do is start at the bottom. Governance has a clear owner. That's our executive management team. Executive management team, senior management team, it's the board. The board is accountable and responsible for governance. Oh, there's two words for you. Accountable and responsible. You're responsible within the business. You are responsible to shareholders and stakeholders. But you're accountable under the eyes of the law. Only directors, only this executive management team in acme.com can ever be held accountable. I can make you responsible for information security, but I cannot make you accountable without making you a director. Only the legal entity of director and higher, executive management, can truly be considered to be accountable. So senior managers own, are responsible, and are accountable for governance. But governance is not something your senior management team actually want to do. Governance is really, really, really important, but it's something that's enforced upon us. Governance is enforced upon us. It comes from two things: due care and due diligence, laws and regulations. Due care and due diligence are the implicit version of due care of governance. So there we go. Governance, we've defined governance. It's a woolly thing that's hard to define, but we've now got a very clear definition of it. It is due care and due diligence. Now, does that help you a lot? We've gone from one woolly, grey, ambiguous thing called governance to something maybe even more woolly and more grey: due care and due diligence. Due care and due diligence is the idea of doing what is right, to doing what is in the stakeholders' interest, doing what is reasonable. The other external influencing factor that forces corporate governance upon us: legs and regs, law and regulation. Law and regulation is the explicit requirement for governance. So we get an implicit, woolly one, and we get an explicit, clear one. Law and regulation. So these things force us to do governance. So the concept is very, very straightforward. In a governance-led organization, we are required by either due care and due diligence, the implicit requirement, or by legs and regs, the explicit requirement. We are required to do what is reasonable. If we don't do what is reasonable, then we can be held accountable for it. The story I usually tell people is the disaster we had in London on the Thames River. I'm sitting just beside St Paul's this week, working in London City, just beside the Bank of England, and the Thames is just down the road. In the 1980s, there was a disaster on the Thames. There was a pleasure cruiser called a Marchioness, a boat that took people for pleasure cruises up and down the Thames late at night, a party boat. The boat had been health and safety audited many times and had always passed its health and safety audit. But the boat had a disaster, had an accident. Lives were lost. During the subsequent police investigation, they realized that even though every box was ticked, health and safety was not taken seriously in the company. Health and safety was just a box-ticking compliance issue. And when people's lives are involved, that's not reasonable. It's not reasonable not to take health and safety very seriously. So the two directors that owned the company were actually brought to court and successfully prosecuted on a failure of due care and due diligence. They had the right number of life jackets, but they were only brought out to show the auditors. When the auditors went away, they were locked away. They had the right number of serviceable life vessels, lifecraft. But when the auditors went away, they were tied up and secured away. Everybody did health and safety training, but it was nothing more than a paper box-ticking exercise. It took us 18 months to secure a prosecution of the managing directors of the company because we were trying to prosecute them over something that's very ambiguous, very woolly. Due care and due diligence. Due care and due diligence is doing what is reasonable. Well, that's up for argument, isn't it? What's reasonable? What's not? When we finished the prosecution, as a direct result of the court case, we then created explicit black and white laws. We created the law called corporate manslaughter. And the corporate manslaughter law lays out in black and white explicitly what the responsibilities and accountabilities for the board of directors when we're dealing with public safety. We must take it seriously. Governance is only part of it. Governance is the ability to do what is right, to do what is reasonable, and to be able to prove in a court of law you did what was right. Risk is the way we prove it. Risk is us proving that what we did was reasonable. If the Marchioness could show, the owners of the boat could show, that they conducted detailed risk assessments by independent experts, and the independent experts said the risks that they were taking with the public were reasonable, well, that's the evidence that you're doing what is reasonable. Risk is the language of business. All business operates on the principles of risk. In 2009, I resigned from the closest thing you could get these days to a job for life. I had 13 years service in BT. I was very happy. I was on a good wage. But I decided to take a risk, a large risk. I resigned 2 years in to the worst recession we'd seen in a generation. And I resigned my 13-year job with my pension and my health and all of the benefits that it gave me. I resigned to start a new company, a new business. What did many of my friends think of me at that stage? What did many of my friends and colleagues think? Well, they thought I should be locked up in a small padded room for my own protection. The words early, and early is a very important word in this sentence. The words early, midlife crisis, were mentioned more than once. Me, being a SAD auditor and risk specialist, I can show you still to today the several spreadsheets that I have looking at the risk I was taking. Because you see, behind every business is a very simple formula: risk and reward. You see, businesses take risk in order to gain rewards. Every business is about balancing the amount of risk with the amount of reward. If the reward is low, the risk level should be low. I was in quite a safe job. I was in a low risk, low reward situation. I had the potential to take a higher risk, but to make that risk worth it, the rewards also have to be much higher. You could almost argue the same of executive management. Executive management, the people with the big salaries, are paid the high rewards, but that's because they're supposed to. And I know this is a bit of theory, but it's supposed to be that they face the highest risk. If we don't do our job, functional managers don't do their job, we can get sacked because we're responsible. But the people at the top are accountable, which actually means they can go to jail. Now in America, they tend to be very good at enforcing this. In Europe, we tend to be very poor, very bad at enforcing this. With reward comes risk. With risk should come reward. And that's the balancing act that every single business needs to do. Businesses go through cycles. We're currently still pretty much bumping across the bottom of a recession. What that actually means, we're in a low risk, low reward cycle. I much more enjoy high risk, high reward cycles. I was in businesses doing really well in the late 1990s. It was a high risk, high reward environment. Then we had the millennium bubble burst and we went into a low risk, low reward environment. The thing was, a couple of years after, by 2001, 2002, we were emerging back into a very, very high risk, high reward. Maybe too high of risk, too high of reward. Because of course we know what happened in 2007, the bubble burst again, and because this time the size of the risk and the size of the reward, the speed of the cycle was so fast, then we're now in a very low risk, very low reward cycle. So you could almost argue that risk appetite is driven by more factors than just a business. It's driven by global economics, by global politics, by global events. But risk is inherent into everything we do, and risk is the language of the business. A risk assessment, evidence that a risk assessment has been done correctly, is the evidence we need to prove that we have followed due care and due diligence in the corporate governance of the organization. And of course, we've already mentioned compliance, because it's due care and due diligence, law and regulation that forces governance upon us, and the way we prove that we're compliant with the law is to be conducting risk assessment and risk analysis. So again, GRC is an acronym. It is a TLA. But when you put G or C together, they become much more than the sum of their parts. It's more than just an acronym. Governance is governance, risk is risk, compliance is compliance. But when you put the three of them together, they become GRC. GRC is the means by which a business is managed. The means by which a business is managed. So this is a summary of what we've covered so far. Compliance, implicit and explicit requirements, forces us into governance. Governance is about strategy and direction, but it's also about being accountable and responsible. And the way that we ensure that we're accountable and responsible, the way we make sure that we've taken care of due diligence and due care requirements, and we followed law and regulation, is we use risk frameworks. And the risk frameworks is driven by value versus benefit. I mean, think of this, could be project management. Hell, it is project management. Project management is all about value realization and cost benefit analysis. And we're about evidence and assurance. So if we're doing this properly, GRC collects together everything we need to prove in a court of law that we've been compliant, that we've been doing the right thing for our stakeholders. Very important slide, the concept of compliance forcing governance and governance requiring risk mitigation strategies. If you can prove in a risk calculation that the risk is worth taking, the risk is balanced with the reward, there's virtually nothing you can't do in a business. It's the way a business is run. When I decided to leave my former employer, I did my risk versus reward calculations. And they tried to prove to me whether or not it was actually worth my while taking the huge risk of going out by myself. GRC makes up the responsibility of the senior management team. Together, they are responsible and accountable. It is the duty of the senior managers to understand GRC within their environment. But we are just one form of GRC. There's GRC all over your business. Every single department, every function is supposed to be managed using GRC methodology. We are but one form of GRC. That says is but one form. It's supposed to say capital I, capital S, IS. Information system, information security is but one form of GRC. We are no more important. We are no less important. We look at the data systems, and the data infrastructures, and everything that might impact D, S, and I. That's what we're about. Governance, risk, and compliance. The senior managers must understand the business requirements. The business managers must understand the business goals. They must understand the business risks. They have to provide a strategy and direction. They have to provide sponsorship and budget. They have to retain oversight and control. If I put my auditor's hat on me for a little second, I have never done an audit of a business, and I've never found an IT team during an audit. During all my time auditing, I've never found an IT department that couldn't deliver technical security controls. If somebody would just tell them what those controls should be and give them a budget to implement. It's not up to us to decide what controls are right for the business. It's not up for us to ever say no to the business. We don't say no. We don't make decisions. We advise. We talk about risk. We help the business make an informed decision, but always, 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 the business is right. We don't tell the business what to do. The business tells us what to do. Now, this is why you work for Acme.com. I've audited dozens and dozens of countries. I've audited dozens and dozens of companies over the years. And I know your business may not be like that. But Acme.com is. And this week, and next week, and the 11th of June, you're working for Acme.com. You must leave the bad strategy, the bad organization of your own business behind you. Because if you keep focusing on your own business the way you've experienced it, you haven't got a hope. Because that's not who you're working for. You're working for acme.com, and we get clear strategy and direction. We get proper sponsorship and budget, but the senior management team does retain very tight oversight and control. This is acme.com. Of course, if your senior management team don't do this, CISM, CISA, CGEIT, COBIT, doesn't work. None of this works outside a governance-led organization. So acme.com for this exam is a governance-led organization. How do you change the mind of your CISA or CISM? How do you change the mind of your CISA or your CIO? Well, that's what the CGEIT accreditation is. Remember we mentioned CGEIT was the corporate governance accreditation? CGEIT's the accreditation that says, look, this is the role of the board. This is what the board needs to do. This is what executive management needs to decide. You need to tell these people exactly what it is that you want in terms of business. We translate that into IT, and the IT department implements the technical controls. Senior managers own all the governance, risk, and compliance in your business. They own it all in acme.com. That means that they own Information Systems GRC. So if this is the way it is, what we need is an easy model, a model that would allow us to implement this governance-led system. Now, a word of warning. If you've studied other standards, if you've done something like PCI DSS or ISO 27000, the terminology that I'm about to use is the same words with different meanings. So please don't get confused between the ISACA terminology and things like ISO 27000. We are pretty convinced that our technology, our terminology, our taxonomy is based on very strong principles. It's based on something called COSO, and COSO is much more all-consuming than something like ISO 27000, which is a very limited standard in my opinion. So let's take a look at the way that we're supposed to do it. At the center of everything we do, at the heart of every decision, every process, we get the senior management executive governance entity. The senior people must provide strategic direction. I don't mean the senior people decide on which firewall or the configuration of your firewall. What the senior people decide on is policy. Policy is the strategic direction, the strategic intention of our organization. The board sets policy. Policies are high-level documents. They give an overarching overview. They set us goals and objectives that should be achieved. Policies are things that we should do, things that we should aim for. Policies, though, are very high level. They're not very detailed. They're open to interpretation. So a policy by itself is not much use. A policy is a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, maybe 3. If a policy is a page long, I always take the view that it is incorrect. It should never go to volumes. If your policies go to volumes, you haven't really got policy. Acme.com has policy. Acme.com's policies are short, concise, open to interpretation. They rarely change. They are updated infrequently, but they are checked regularly. So these are some of the founding principles of this. You see, a policy for internet use in ISACA is short, concise, simple. Policy for internet use. Internet is provided for business use only. Personal use is at own risk, subject to terms and conditions of the business. No employee should ever do anything on the internet that can be considered offensive, obscene, racist to any other member of staff or customer. The internet cannot be used for illegal purposes according to the jurisdiction that you're in. Any breach of internet policy will result in disciplinary action. So you see, that's the whole policy. It's woolly, it's vague, but it sets out some principles. The internet is for business use. Personal use is at your own risk. It sets out the fact that, you know what? We don't want obscene things on the internet. We don't want you doing illegal things on the internet. If you do them, we're going to take disciplinary action. But what is obscene? No pictures, no comments on the board on that one, thank you. But what is obscene? I mean, obscene is a word that's there to be argued. In different societies, in different cultures, what's obscene is massively different. In one culture, something obscene could be full frontal nudity. In a separate culture, something obscene could be a woman's face. It changes depending where you are, and we always have to consider cultural sensitivities. So you see, when we come at looking at that, the policy statement's a bit meaningless. So what we need to do is we need to define clearly, we need to explicitly define, what do we mean by the word obscene? What do we mean by the word racist? What do we mean about the word violent? What do we mean about the word sexual? I mean, if I say to you, we ban all violence from the internet. Well, that sounds like a great idea. Well, what have you banned? You've banned Tom and Jerry and The Simpsons. You've banned the BBC News website. You've banned most sporting events, as well as some movie violence and some other violence that's more horrific. Did you really mean to ban the news and to ban sporting events? Was that your intention when you said we've got to ban violence? How about something really safe? Let's ban all forms of racism from internet content. Well, surely there can't be anything wrong with banning racism. Surely that's a very admirable goal. But what about Sarah? What about Sarah that's just joined the business from overseas? Poor Sarah is a victim of racial abuse within the business at the moment. Sarah wants to get help and support on the internet, and you've just banned all types of racism, and that includes the help and support that Sarah wants to get. Was that your intention? You see, we've got to be so careful. We've got to be very careful with the words. The words have to have very clear meanings. The words need to have standardized meanings. Policies are defined in more detail, in explicit, measurable detail, in a standard. Standards are things like the WWW Consortium, the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. Anyone remember W3C? W3C rates internet websites for content. It rates each website for sexual content, violent content, racist content, etc., etc., etc. You see, what we really should be doing with racism is we should be using a standard like the WWW Consortium. And the W3C standard, we could say we're a level 2 out of 5. It generates 0 to 5 in each one. 0 means none, 5 means all allowed. We might want to allow level 2 racism, not because we condone, not because we support or encourage it, because we want people to be able to read news articles on it, And we want people to be able to seek help, support and advice should they be a victim. And according to the WWW Consortium standards, level 2 websites are news, informant, help and support. The 5 levels for violence, for example, level 0 is no violence whatsoever. Level 1, we allow cartoon and documentary violence. Level 2, news violence. Level 3, sporting violence. Level 4 would be an 18's rated movie. Level 5, my favourite. Level 5 is officially defined as wanton and gratuitous bloody gore. So you can see that makes it much easier to say, you know what, maybe we don't want boxing as a sport, because boxing as a sport is a little bit inhumane. It's a little bit too violent. So for violence, cartoons, news, documentaries, level 1 and 2 is acceptable. Standards are measurable security outcomes. Standards are explicit, they're cold, they're hard, they're very well defined. However, that gives us a bit of a problem. If I go to your staff and say, for violence, you're a 2. For sex and nudity, you're a 3. For racism, you're a 2. What the hell does that mean to your end users? What is that actually about? If I go one of users and say, you know, you're a 3 for sex and nudity, am I giving them a score? Or I tell them it's okay to go to third base? You see, to the end user, to the IT team, the standard is pretty meaningless. What they really need is they need a translation document. They need something to translate the cold, hard standard into something that's soft, easy, understandable. What they really need on the standard is some guidelines. Guidelines are soft, fluffy documents. There are separate guidelines for each user community. So different groups of users get together. Different user communities require different guidelines. Managers require a set of guidelines. Staff, users require a set of guidelines. And the manager's guidelines and the user's guidelines are no good for the IT team who are supposed to implement this. Policies, high-arching statements of intent. Standards, factual, cold things we must do that are measurable. Guidelines, soft, fluffy documents to explain what do we mean by word 3 for sex and nudity on the internet. They explain in very clear terms. They explain, do you know what? A picture of your family on the beach and holidays is not a breach of sexual content guidelines. But a picture of my family on your computer on the beach certainly is. It's that subtlety of a guideline. It explains it in plain English to help people understand. Guidelines, soft, fluffy, helpful documents. But that still doesn't make it real. This is all talking about it. Somebody actually has to get round and to do something. Somebody needs to install a proxy server and configure it. And of course, we all know who installs and configures it. This is the people that do step-by-step procedures. This is the IT department. The IT department comes in with step-by-step procedures. This is really idle. This is really idle. I mean, your policy is high level. Your standard could be ISO 27001. The guideline documents are ISO 27003, 4, 5, 7, 9, 26, 32. These are all your ISO guideline documents. Procedures, this is ISO 20000. ISO 20000 is of course ITIL. And ITIL is your step-by-step configuration, the how to do it practically. These are the things that need updated regularly. Every time technology changes, we've got to update the step-by-step procedures. And we know that technology changes on a very, very frequent basis. So this is PSGP. This is how acme.com works. This is what every question on your exam is based on. Policy, standard, guideline, and procedure. You can look at the same model in a slightly different way, because in information security, we're about measuring our success. We all know we can't make things secure. If something was secure, what would the risk be? By something secure, we mean zero risk. And we all know that zero risk is almost impossible to achieve. And if we can achieve it, it's definitely not value for money. So if we're not going to aim to be secure, if we can't be secure, then how do we measure our success? Well, to measure our success, we've got to be very, very specific. So what we do is we create policy plus standard plus guideline equals measurable security outcome. Policy plus standard plus guideline equals controls. Controls are measurable security outcomes. Controls come from policy, standards, and guidelines. Controls are measured during an independent and trustworthy independent process. Notice the word independent in there twice. Controls are measured during an audit. Audits give me independent, trustworthy assurance that the controls are being implemented correctly. And don't forget, the controls come from the strategic direction. The strategic direction is the policy. We take the policy, we turn it into a standard. We take the standard, we turn it into a guideline. Policy plus standard plus guideline equals control. Controls are audited. Auditors then aggregate and summarize the results of the audits and reports the results of the audit to a senior manager, an executive management dashboard. Every director owns their dashboards. Their dashboards are trying to tell them, are we on path? Are we on time? Are we on budget to achieve our strategic objectives? Dashboards provide aggregated management summaries. Dashboards provide a measure to what we're doing. Controls are audited. Audits provide independent and neutral opinion on the implementation. The audits are summarized in the dashboard, and the dashboard gives senior managers something that's extremely important, because don't forget, they're ultimately accountable. I mean, the word accountable, it's got such great connotations. I recently watched Blatter from FIFA give a press conference where he sat up in front of the world's press and he said, everybody in FIFA was committing fraud, but I wasn't, therefore I'm not accountable. And that statement makes no sense whatsoever. It doesn't matter if he was doing fraud or not. What matters is it was his business. He was steering the ship. He was the director in charge. He set the tone. It was on his watch that the fraud was committed, legally making him personally accountable. Assurance is your way as a director of saying, you know, it might have happened on my watch, but it wasn't my fault. Because here's the results of my independent audit report. And my independent audit report says that I looked at all the risks. I did what was reasonable. I measured the risk. I controlled the risk. And I did my very, very best. The audit results give me a level of assurance. Assurance that I have implemented due care and due diligence, that I followed the law and regulation. Assurance gives me the evidence in a courtroom, if necessary, that I've done what was reasonable. See, it goes to show you in ISACA's point of view how important audit is. Audit is absolutely critical, because without audit we haven't got assurance. Without assurance we don't have evidence of due care, due diligence and risk, and without evidence of due care, due diligence and risk, we're accountable. We can be sent to jail. So you see, in acme.com, assurance is an extremely important idea. This is the structure of acme.com. Acme.com has always run its business in this way. The senior management are the foundation of everything that happens. Nothing happens without senior management, because they give us strategic direction. They agree the policy decisions. The audit function is a separate independent unit. It represents the business. The audit team reports to the audit function. The audit function is responsible for the audit plan. It's responsible for the audit scope. All audit reports go back to the audit function. Now watch out for that one, because that can be quite tricky on the exam, on the CISA exam. It'll keep telling you auditors report to the business. It's the business that needs to make a decision. Who sits on the audit function? Who sits on the audit committee? The business. The audit committee represents the business. So another word for these committees is just the business. The business is on the IS committee. The business is on the steering committee. The IS committee is really the IS strategy committee. The IS committee recommends the strategy that the board should follow. And I've just told you, the board provides us the strategy and direction. But do you really think your senior people are going to do some real work and come up with their own strategies? No, of course not. We have a strategy committee that has outside experts, industry experts, and important internal business leaders. The strategy committee recommends to the board the strategy that they should be following, the policies that they should be implementing. The board then picks the strategies, literally rubber stamps them, and then hands them over to the IS steering committee. The IS steering committee is responsible for day-to-day delivery, day-to-day achievement of the IS strategy that's been signed off by the board. All our committees in acme.com are not like your committees at all. All these committees are real. They all do real work. They all have real outputs. None of them sit round and talk about things for years on end and achieve nothing. Remember, you work for acme.com now? Everything that we deliver, everything the audit function delivers, everything the strategy committee delivers, everything the steering committee delivers is done as a project or a program of projects. PMBOK, Project Management Body of Knowledge. PMBOK is a huge topic on every single exam, and we should, at this level, all of us, should have good experience of not just working on a project, but running and sponsoring projects. So project management is actually a significant topic on this exam, and because this exam is aimed at senior people and people with at least 5 years senior experience, we could assume that no one can have 5 years experience of senior management without project experience. So project sponsorship, project manager, that sort of stuff is taken for granted, but is definitely on the exam. Down here at the top of the picture, the FBUs and the IT department. This is just saying, you know what, the IT team in this picture is just another functional business unit. It's just another business as normal department. That's the structure of acme.com. That's who you're working for the next 2 weeks, and certainly who you work for on the 11th. We've just spent the last hour and 5 minutes covering is what I call the common areas. What we've just covered, the governance, risk and compliance, the PSGP, the control, audit, dashboard assurance, all those things we've just covered are critical. They're common across all 4 exams. And unless you grasp those, you're really wasting your time. Every single question on all 4 exams is based on those simple, common founding principles. There are lots of other common areas as well, other things that you can study. The 3 big domains of knowledge across all of these are business, technology, and information security. Anyone got any idea which one of the 3 is the most important? Okay, the clue, of course, is in the diagram. Business is always the most important. We must sit in between technology and the business. We talk business risk and strategic achievement to the business. And we talk controls and firewalls and IDSs to the IT department and technologists. But those are the 3 areas that we really concentrate on: business, technology, and information security. But by far the most important one is business, the business goals, the business strategy, business. And don't forget acme.com. We're a ruthlessly for-profit business. Our only measure of success is profitability. Our only measure of success is profitability. The business tools that I'm talking about are the words that we've already mentioned. Strategy. Strategy is a word that's bounded about a lot. But just because people talk about strategy, just because somebody's showing you a piece of paper with the word strategy in it, doesn't actually mean you've got strategy. A strategy is split up into 3 different plans: a tactical strategy plan, a medium-term strategy plan, and a long-term strategy plan. Long-term strategy plans are usually 5 and 6 years. Medium-term, 18 months to 4 years. Tactical strategy plan, it's the next 18 months. The strategy tells us the direction, the vision, the mission that we have. In my business, I have a clear strategy. Our strategy is very simple. We deliver through consultancy that is always in the best interest of the customer and not our own. That's our very simple strategy. We're going to make money by offering true independent consultancy that is always in the customer's best interest, not our own. The strategy goes on to say we are concentrating on COBIT, ITAF, TOGAT, and SAMHSA frameworks. Our key areas of specialism, our key market areas, our verticals, will be finance, oil and gas, and multinationals and large NGO, non-governmental organizations. The strategy is about how do we want to make money? What's going to make us different? What's going to make us money? Because the strategy my business has is to deliver true independent advice, we won't sell anything but advice. The minute that I sell a product, the minute I offer a vendor solution, well then I broke my strategy, because the minute that I sell a product, the minute that I sell a license or a vendor solution, I make money from it. And if I make money by selling vendors A's product, and you ask me what the best product in the market is, what's the chances that I say vendor B? To implement my strategy, I have roadmaps. Roadmaps are the information security manager, the functional manager, taking the strategy and creating a detailed set of projects or a big program of work. The roadmap has a lot of detail on it. It has specific objectives. It has specific budget amounts. It has named owners, named project managers, and it has KPIs and KGIs and CFFs measures attached to it. A roadmap is the basis really of your business plan. Your business plan is what you're going to do on a day-to-day basis to deliver the strategy. So the strategy is broken down into a roadmap, which the senior management needs to sign off, and then you create your day-to-day business plan based on your 5-6 year roadmap. One of the most important tools, one of the most exam question tools on this entire exam is called CMM. CMM is critical for auditors. CMM is an open standard for process improvement. What does an auditor specialize in? No, it's not the start of a bad auditor joke. What does an auditor specialize in? I love asking other auditors, what do you specialize in, just to see what the answer is. And I usually get, oh, I specialize in quality, or I specialize in health and safety, or information security, or... Do you know what an auditor specializes in? Process. Auditors audit process. Auditors are all about process improvement. CMM is a process improvement methodology. It's everywhere. It's embedded into COBIT. It's embedded into ITAF. It's embedded into RISC IT. It's embedded into VAL IT. Hell, do you know how important CMM is? We just bought it. ISACA has taken over, bought over the CMM standard, the CMM framework, the CMM methodology. We are now guardians, custodians of CMM. CMM is so important to us, we can't have somebody else change it. CMM is about measuring continuous process improvement. You might be familiar with CMMI. CMM is a generic business process tool. CMMI was customized for CMM for integration. What's integration? CMM for IT. That's really what CMMI is. Go on, give me a guess. Who developed CMMI? Yep, ISACA developed CMMI, which is the CMM integration model, and that's specific for software development, for software deployment, and for incident handling, ITSM, IT Service Desk Management. A balanced scorecard is another very important tool, especially in the CISM and CGEIT exams. We'll be asked to measure everything we do. Don't forget, ISACA's an audit organization. That's fundamentally what we are. We are an audit organization. So auditors are extremely important, and auditors love measuring things. So everything we do must produce evidence, must be measured. But how do you measure something that's woolly, that's vague? How do you measure something that's ambiguous, that doesn't have clear, defined boundaries? How do you measure something like strategic achievement? There's a nasty one for you. How do you measure strategic achievement? With a balanced scorecard, obviously. Balanced scorecard is a strategic achievement tool. If we're ever asked to measure something that's hard to measure, if we're ever asked to measure something like strategic achievement, we need these business tools. Balanced scorecards, CMM, gap analysis. I mean, gap analysis is the most used one. It's a very simple idea. Where would you like to be? where you are now, what's the gap? Every audit is a gap analysis. The business needs to know where it is. The auditor gathers evidence of where you are and then creates findings and recommendations. And if you're really naughty, we create exceptions based on your gap. The gap between where you'd like to be and where you are today. If you ever get a question, what is the first step, or how do you start, or how do you plan? The answer to all those questions is usually perform a gap analysis. How can you start or plan anything if you don't know where you need to be and don't know where you are today? It's like that old Irish joke where the American tourist stops to ask the Irish farmer how to get to Dublin. And the Irish farmer says back to him, well, you know what? If I was you, I wouldn't start from here. I know it's an old one. Project management, risk management, and process assurance are other business tools that are shared in common between all four of them. Between all four of them, we do get technology. If you've bought the official manual or at least read the ISACA official exam outline, you might be scratching your head and saying, I don't remember technology. ISACA sort of cheats on this one. We don't cover technology. So many other courses, so many other things cover technology, we don't think we should have to. This course, this exam, this certification, it's designed for an expert, somebody with many years experience in this field. If you have many years experience in information security, then why do I need to teach you technology? We take technology for granted, but it absolutely is a definitive topic on the exam. You don't need to know the details about any technology, but you do need a very good overview, a very good understanding. There's another certification from an organization called ISC Squared, and they've got this famous accreditation called CISP, C-I-S-S-P. CISP is pretty much nothing more than a big long list of controls. It really defines what each control delivers. People say CISM, CISA is much easier than CISP. CISP used to have 10 domains, but CISM only has 4. CISA only has 5. Therefore, CISP is much more difficult. Nothing could be further from the truth. This exam is many times more difficult than a CISP because the level of technology control that you need to know before you start studying, before you can sit the exam, is equivalent of every piece of technology control in CISP. CISP is the base technology requirement for our course, and if it's a really weak area, rather than read CISM or CISA books or read ISACA material, the best place to read about technology control is a CISP book. So here's a little clue for you. You know, if you're weak on controls, don't be looking at ISACA material to help you. We haven't got much on controls, but what we would recommend is going and looking very much at some CISP material. CISP is really good at this. We're not very good at it at all. The list of control knowledge is extremely wide. And the list of controls, as we say here, is CISP. And this little diagram is brilliant on the right hand side because that's what controls are about. We don't need to know just the list of controls. We'll need to work out which control gives the business the best cost benefit analysis. We look at the risk, and we try to look at the risk in terms of profit and loss. The best control is not the one that provides the most protection. The best control is not the one that provides the most protection. The best control is one that provides sufficient protection at the lowest cost point with minimal impact on the business. It's the control that provides us reasonable protection at the lowest cost point with the minimal impact on the business being able to succeed. We don't want controls to stop the business. It sounds like a stupid thing to say, but it is so true. I can give you examples of thousands of profitable businesses that have had major cyber incidents but still exist, still trade today. I can't give you a single example of a non-profitable business, a loss-making business, that's never had a cyber attack, that's never had a major compromise, but still exists. Think about it. TalkTalk had 11 major compromises in 10 months. 11 of them in 10 months. They still exist because they still make a profit. But if another telco goes out of business because they're losing money, it doesn't really matter if they're secure or not. See, the only thing that truly matters in acme.com is making money. If we make money, we survive. If we don't make money, we don't survive. All our security controls are trying to make sure we make as much money as possible and we don't end up losing the profit to information security risk. So everything we've done so far is the commonality between them. Time to move on. Wow, we're in an hour and a half already. Time to move on to what the difference between CISM and CISA actually is. CISA's all about audit. And it's all about measuring. It's all about evidence. It's all about assurance. CISA is our auditor. We must know about general audit principles. We must understand the governance model for business management. Project risk is huge to us. I mean, think about it. Where do we lose the most money in IT and information systems? Is it truly because of hacks? Or is it because of badly managed projects and scope creep and lack of measurable deliverables? In my experience, I would strongly argue that we lose more money on badly managed project risk than we do on hacking or phishing or farming. Operational risk is the risk of hacking and the risk of fraud. And of course, we've got to understand the vast array of controls. The CISA has to understand, what does the CGEIT do? What does the CISM do? What does the CRISC do? Because that's what you're auditing as a CISA. You're auditing processes. Audit is all about assurance. We must deliver a repeatable, trusted service. That means we must remain independent at all times. We must remain trustworthy at all times. And we do what's called a substantive audit process. We, according to ISACA, auditors are subject matter experts. Auditors should be able to advise and support the auditee. What we hate, what we don't like, what we wish to avoid in nearly every circumstance is what we call a compliance audit. A compliance audit is a really bad thing as far as we're concerned because it's a tick box exercise. Now, sometimes you do need it. If you want to be PCI DSS, well then if you want to be PCI DSS certified, then you just want somebody to tick boxes. What we like is a substantive process. That's a process where the subject matter expert is the auditor, and the auditor just does not tick boxes. The auditor tries to understand the business goals, understand the business drivers, and ascertain which is right or wrong. The substantive auditor gathers evidence from the business. A compliance, non-substantive audit. Do you have an IPS, an intrusion prevention system? Yes or no? Auditee, no, we don't have one, but no. Do you have an IPS system or not? No, we don't, but no buts. You don't have one, fail. Compliance audit. Substantive audit. Do you have an intrusion prevention system? No. Why not? What do you have instead? Why have you not got one? Explain to me, is there a business reason? Well, actually, we're currently running an IDS. We're very immature with our IDS process. We've too many false positives and false negatives. What we would like to do is to learn how to manage the IDS a bit better, because we know an IDS is a burglar alarm. But we understand that an IPS is a weapons system. It's a burglar alarm with a Gatling gun. And every false positive on an IDS is a pain in the posterior. Every false alarm in an IPS is a self-inflicted denial of service attack. So we've got a project plan. It's going to take us 2 years to go from IDS to IPS. And here's the project plan. Here's our deadlines. Here's the owner. Here's the budget. Here's our progress so far. You see, in a substantive audit, I would pass you. Even though my audit sheet says IPS, I think that you've given me sufficient evidence, sufficient reasons, and I have sufficient confidence, sufficient assurance that there's a real business reason, and eventually you've got a very clear plan of how to succeed, on how to get your IPS implementation. Substantive auditor. That's who a CISA is. So, this is as close as I can get to helping you cheat, because these are what I call my answer rules. If you pay attention to nothing else, wake up and pay attention now. You see, there's some general principles you can apply to every single question. Number one, an auditor is all about evidence. If you see a question that says the auditor thinks, the auditor might have found, the auditor could have found, if you see questions about might, could, may, the answer is always gather more evidence. We need evidence. It doesn't matter what an auditor thinks, it only matters what the auditor has evidence for. Everything we do in a business should be based on the principle of risk. The principles of risk is there a risk and reward? Is the risk and reward balanced? Another way to put that is, has a proper business case been done? Is there a business reason for doing this? Will the business make more money if we... Everything should be based on risk principles. The business always wins. Our whole goal is to enable the business to succeed. So our whole goal is there to make sure that the business does succeed. Compliance with the law is the one exception we make. Now, most of the time, we never say, we don't like saying no. We don't like saying no. We say yes if the business understands the risk. If the business accepts the risk, we can go ahead. But there's one time we will say no. The one time we will say no is if there's a law that we need to comply with. So things like the Data Protection Act and the General Data Protection Act, if If there's a law, we will always say the law wins. So watch out for that, because the business is right all the time, apart from if a law says something else. So that's extremely, confusing, but you've got to watch out for that one. What do we audit? We only audit a process. I pressed the button, I pressed the screen there to rub something off and it jumped forward. We always audit a process. I can't audit your expense system, your expense database, your HR expense system for submitting employee expenses. I can't audit that, because that's a process that starts with a piece of paper and ends with money in a bank account. And as an auditor, I can either audit the whole process or nothing. What's the point of me auditing the database if nobody checks the mileage that employees enter? How can I give you any assurance that the data's got integrity, that the data is trustworthy, if anybody can enter any mileage and there's no assurance, there's no checks and balances? And of course, as an auditor, we want continuous auditing, things like controlled self-assessment and GAS, generalized audit software. We like automation. Automation is very, very good for us in ISACA. So, we also need to know some tools of the trade. Make sure you read up. I haven't got time to cover these tonight, but you are going to get specific questions on sampling techniques. Auditors can't review everything, so we need to know our sampling techniques. We need to know our stratified mean, non-stratified mean, statistical, non-statistical. There's dozens of sampling techniques that we need to understand, and we need to be able to apply them. If you've got 100,000 people in your company, and I'm asked to audit the expense system, the entire process for this year, you could have 1 million expense claims. I can't audit 1 million expense claims, so I've got to go and select a statistical sampling technique, and it's a very mathematical thing. That's something you definitely need to understand. Then the next thing is measuring techniques, CMM, balanced scorecard, CSF, KGI, KPI. You need to understand the specific measuring techniques, because auditors measure everything. And then we need to understand the reporting techniques. Who do we report to? When do we report? Who approves our report? Do we change our report? So the report is very important as well. Who does it go to? Who can change it? What can we do with it? The biggest technical thing on the audit exam is software development. And software development, SDLC, software development comes up in an awful lot of detail, an explicit amount of details. There's a huge amount of details on software development. We need to know everything, like the difference between Agile, Agile Scrum, DevSecOps, rough DevSecs. There's a whole list of development. We need to know software QA testing techniques. We need to know about tracing and tagging, and an awful lot of detail on software development and software testing methods. There are other things that come up as well, but the big thing on the CISA course is definitely software development and software QA. So if you don't know your development, your software stuff, you really need to concentrate on studying that one for your CISA exam. The CISA questions are a bit like, this happens, what do you do next? You usually act like an employee. Don't forget, a CISA is an internal employee. They're not a third party. They're not a regulator. The auditors work for our business. So if it says, the auditor finds a virus, what should he do? Well, they should just act like any other staff member. If any staff member finds a virus, what should they do? Well, they should phone the support desk. They should report it. If we find something like fraud, we never report to the police. We always report to the business, which is the audit committee. So if we find something really bad, like ongoing fraud during an audit, we report the findings as soon as we have evidence. We never report something without evidence. So when we do it, how do you run an audit? That's about scope and terms of engagement. Scope is everything in an audit. You can only see what is in scope. What audit tool you would use? This is around things like sampling techniques, software auditing techniques, things like balancing and reconciliation. These are our audit tools. And it'll ask us what's the right sampling technique. What measuring technique you will use? Again, that goes down to capability maturity model integration, balanced scorecard, these different tools for measuring. We will also get a few questions on which control is the best. As an auditor, you find this control. What would you recommend to change the control to? And you get a list of 4 controls and you're supposed to pick the next best answer. That was CISA. Let's have a quick peek at CISM in the same way. CISM is all about management. It's about setting up and running a department inside acme.com. We use a governance model for all business management. So managers give us a strategy, they give us a vision and a mission. We convert it into a roadmap, the roadmap into a business plan, the business plan into a number of projects or programs throughout the year. Managing project risk is important to us because everything we deliver is managed through projects. We also need to look at operational risk. Operational risk is a sort of subtle way of saying we need to look at IT service desk management. We need to look at ITIL because we're interested in managing the business risk in the operational life cycle, and ITIL is operational business risk. We also have quite a lot of details on BCP, BIA, and DRP. There's a whole load of alphabet soup in here, and we've got to learn all the measures and what they do. You've got to be very competent on your RTOs, recovery time objectives, your MTOs, maximum tolerable outages, or POs, recovery point objectives, fixed times, maximum tolerable downtimes, restore and recovery strategy, and resumption strategies. There's a whole load of acronyms and easy to ask exam questions in BCP, BIA, and DR. Very, very important topic on the CISM exam. You need to be really competent of all those acronyms and what they mean in BCP, DR. We also need to understand a vast range of controls. We need to know our IDSs from our IPSs. We need to know our PPTP from our L2TP. So it's what controls do you need to know? Well, that's the CISP, isn't it? The CISP gives you the list of controls that you need to know for this exam. There's very little about controls in the official books, but trust me, you get a lot of control questions on the exam. I would say 25%, that gives you 50 control questions on your exam. 50 control questions. Okay, by the way, that still means 75% of your exam is not technical. See, there's 2 ways to look at that. You know, 50 questions is a lot of control questions, but 50 questions is only 25% of the exam. That means 75% of the most technical exam that we do is not focused on IT controls. It's focused on business, value for money, risk, strategic achievement, governance. It's about GRC. CISM management is about translating business requirements into measurable results while managing risk in a cost-effective way. Oh, I do like that statement. It's such an ISACA statement.
Management is about translating business requirements into measurable results while managing risk in a cost-effective way. We're to deliver a repeatable, trusted service. The manager, the CISM, must be a business leader. That means we interact with senior management teams, we understand the business, we understand finance, we understand budgeting, we understand the political game that's played in a large business. The CISM is a subject matter expert. We are the technical architect. That's the sort of level that we need. Technical architects, the perfect sort of technical level we need. We need to we need to understand the whole business and its goals and objectives. We need to be able to influence and deliver results despite residual risk. The answer rules. Everything we do is about strategic alignment. Here's one for you. If strategic alignment is the answer to any question, pick it. It's going to be right. Well, 99% of the time. But it gives you an idea of how important strategic alignment is. Strategic alignment is everything. That means our goal is not to say no to the business. Our goal is to achieve the business goals themselves. Our goal is to do whatever makes the business profitable. Everything we do is based on the principles of risk. Risk needs to balance with reward. The business always wins, the business is always right, but the business wants and needs compliance with the law. So we always say the business is right, the business always gets to do what it wants to do. We never stop the business, we never ever prevent the business, except when it's compliance, because we have to be compliant with the law. Everything we do as a CISM must be measured, because don't forget, the goal of a CISM is to make an auditor happy, because the ultimate success of our department and function depends on the results of an auditor. Two sides of the one coin, do you remember? And what does success look at? Success is not the most secure environment. Success is not the highest level of protection. Success is balanced protection measured by the audit. Balanced protection measured by the audit. You really need to know your business tools, your risk-based vulnerability management. You need to understand what vulnerability management and what risk-based management is. And virtually any control can and does come up. There's so many controls. CISM has many more controls than the CISA. Again, it's your CISP list, isn't it? Questions. What's the purpose of? What's the purpose of a risk program? What's the purpose of the audit function? What's the purpose of senior management? Who's responsible for? Who's the best person to ask about? Risk management is, there are several of those calling me. Sorry, that's a former president of ISACA calling me there. Okay, which control is best suited to? So you get 4 controls in a list. What's the best one for each case? How do you measure? And the one that they always do, select the best, worst, first, last thing you do. What's the best thing an auditor should do? What's the worst thing a manager should do? What's the first thing you would do? What's the last thing you would do? Watch out for bullet pointed list. Every bullet pointed list in ISACA, a committee has spent hundreds of hours considering what order that bullet point list should be. Every bullet point list we give you is in order of importance. So again, those lists, you've got to go over them again and again and again. You get so many questions. What's the first thing you should do? If the list has 6 items in it, and the question is what the first thing you'll do is, they won't give you the first thing on the list of 6. They won't give you the second thing on the list of 6. They won't give you the third thing on the list of 6. They'll give you the last 3 and ask you which is the first thing you do out of the remaining list. So the answer, you don't actually get to say it's the first thing, but it's the first thing out of your choice of answers. They're always doing things like that. Ordered lists, extremely important. Look, there's a few people doing CGEIT. I admire those people going for their CGEIT. It's a big challenge. A bigger challenge in CGEIT than passing the exam is proving you've got 5 years governance experience. That means that you can prove that you've 5 years creating strategy and governance. In other words, you're 5 years as a director. So passing the exam only allows you to consider your CV for membership. So CGEIT itself, I think, is quite a straightforward exam, but it's the application process afterward is extremely important. CGEIT is all about strategy. It's about trying to drive business value and the success of your business by setting a direction, by setting a strategy that's going to work for your business. It's to understand that the IT department knows how to do technical things, but they don't know how to run a successful business. It's up to us to tell them what to be done in order to make the business a success. It's about effective management. It's about communicating clear principles and policies and creating an effective structure. So CGEIT is sort of in between CISM and CISA. It's sort of somewhere in the middle of the two of those. It's all about creating strategy. CRISC, well, I think possibly out of the whole lot of them, out of the 4 accreditations, CRISC is the easiest one. Now, those people doing CRISC are now shaking their head going, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But let me explain, let me validate my answer. If you look at that list, it's all about risk. The only thing a CRISC needs to understand is risk. Now, you need to understand it pretty damn well, and we need to understand why we're doing it. But the goal of a CRISC is to carry out the risk assessments. So the scope of CISM is large. The scope of CISA is huge. But the scope of CRISC is much narrower. Now that means we need a lot more detail. We will expect you to know the exact methodologies in the different risk frameworks. We'd like you to compare and contrast risk IT with CRAM, with FAIR, with VAL IT, with NIST. You need to know what all the risk frameworks you do, what the different tools, and what the pros and cons about them are. The rest of these are about 3 miles wide and a couple inches deep. CRISC is about 3 inches wide and 5 miles deep. So it's a much narrower focus, but it's a very, very deep specialist focus. So if you're doing your CRISC, we assume that you already know your risk principles and you've read Risk IT. If you haven't looked at Risk IT, drop everything, download it, and go straight to it. Your exam's on Risk IT. By the way, if you're a CISA and you haven't read ITAF, if CISA is what you're going for, and you don't know ITAF inside out and back to front, what have you been doing? What have you been doing? ITAF is CISA. If you're a CISM and haven't looked at the Implementer's Guide to COBIT, CISM is all about the Implementer's Guide to COBIT. That's what the exam is actually on. Go and look at your ITAF document. Every single topic, word, everything we do is an ITAF for the CISA. It's in the Implementer's Guide to COBIT for CISM. And for CRISC, it's Risk IT. And a little bit of VAL IT, Value for Money IT. A little bit of VAL IT, but it's a lot to do with Risk IT. CGEIT's a little bit different. It's all of them combined together. So there's no easy document to look at for a CGEIT.
It's a couple of weeks away to the exam. The last couple of weeks is all important. So make sure you've started to think about the exam day itself. The door closes at 8:30. It says in all your joining instructions 7:30. I've never been there at 7:30. Everett knows that. Do make sure that you're in by 8:10, 8:15 at the latest. If you get in, the door will be locked at 8:30. It's a bit like an election. If you're in at 8:30, they must allow you to do the exam. The only thing that can stop you if you're in the exam hall at 8:30 is that you haven't got government issued photographic ID. You will be turned away. You will be rightly refused your exam if you've not got photographic government issued ID. There's very hard to make an exception for this one. So you must have that with you. Don't take anything else into the exam hall with you. You're going to be asked to leave it at the front or the back. You will need at least 3 pencils. You will need a high quality eraser. Okay, you'll also need a pencil sharpener if you want to. I take mechanical pencils. I take a 0.7 millimeter mechanical pencil. Okay, if you haven't got one, they were on offer on Amazon a couple of days ago for about £3. 0.7 millimeter mechanical pencil. Okay, I can't be bothered sharpening stuff, and where do you put the sharpenings, and you keep sharpening. I don't want to concentrate my pencil during the exam. I just want to get on with it. Okay, and yes, I am that bad as an auditor and a risk manager that I actually take 3 mechanical pencils. Well, hell, you don't know if one's going to break. I think that's a balanced risk decision. They're only a couple quid a piece. A high quality eraser, your ID, and your admission card, the letter you got from ISACA. Now, you don't strictly need your admission card. You can still do the exam as long as you've got photographic government issued ID. But it's a great idea to print it. It's a great idea to bring it with you. You need the numbers and the codes and the centers of it. So if you haven't got it with you, you're going to have to write it down or ask one of the proctors to write it down. It just adds something else to be worried about. So print out your email or take the letter with you. It has everything you need on it. I recommend strongly to wear a jacket or fleece, something you can take off and hang on the back of your seat. You could be sitting in front of a window in front of the blazing sunshine. Or you could be sitting right at the back in the dark corner of the room where all the aircon is and it's about 11 degrees Celsius. So do bring clothing. You might be in there up to 4 hours, so do bring comfortable clothing. Now, ISACA has got a very strict rule about water. Yes, water. You're not allowed anything else on your desk. So my advice is water load before you go in. Number one, you'll have to drink less. But number two, if you drink a load of water at the start, you will have to go to the ladies or gents. That's a good thing. You need to stand up. You need to take breaks. The only way you can take a break is by putting your hand up and either asking for some water or putting your hand up and asking to go to the toilets. You will be escorted both for water and to the toilet. You will be escorted into the toilet, but you will not be escorted into the cubicle. It will only be checked before you go in. So make sure to take a restroom break. Do you know what I do? In my jacket or fleece, I usually get a bunch of grapes, wash them, clean them, and put them into a bit of kitchen roll. Not a plastic bag, it makes too much noise. Something nice and quiet so as I can eat grapes out of my pocket during the exam. Okay, they get me round the need for water. I'm one of these people, even talking about it right now, I feel a need to drink something. Okay, if you're anything like me, I'm actually serious, I'm going to have to open the bottle and have a drink now. Okay, if you're actually anything like me, you need to constantly drink, so do plan for the fact you're not allowed water on your desk. If you've got medication, the medication should be left in your personal belongings at the front or back of the room. If you need access to the medication at any stage, if you put your hand up, you'll be escorted down to it. If the medication you take is for real emergency, you do need to make sure you bring a doctor's note to bring the medication to the system. Okay. So that's the exam day itself. There's no secret technique on this one. There's no secret technique. You start at the start, you walk your way through, work your way through, you get to the end, you walk out. There's no magic method that's going to help you. You're either past it or you failed it by that stage. All the effort comes in now. This is the time that you need to be putting in 3, 4, 5 hours a day, 10 hours a day at the weekend. Many people will take the last 3 or 4 days off work and do 12 to 15 hour study days. This is a serious exam. You're up against a lot of competition. So you need to put the hours in. You need to put the effort in. Take each question as it comes. Don't always try to pick the right answer. I try to eliminate 2 wrong answers first. That gets me to a 50-50. I then reread the question and the 2 answers I've left, and I use the principles that we've covered today to help me choose. We pick the answer, we move on, and whatever you do, don't look back, don't think back, don't worry. You just keep moving forward all the time. Does that all make sense? At the end of the exam, you will be leaving early. It's not really a 4-hour exam, so you're not going to know how you've done. Whatever you do, do not check your answers. You'll change more right answers into wrong answers than wrong answers into less. If you ask my advice, when you're finished, leave. You're not going to know how you've done to 6 to 8 weeks. Okay. I got a couple of questions down the side of it. Yes, the session is being recorded. We will upload it to YouTube and distribute the link. So if you missed any of this or the audio failed on you, there will be a YouTube upload link to this. I also get a question as well, and I can't really answer it because I don't know what the answer is. The exam format is being changed very slightly for some of the exams for this June. And we're dropping the number of questions from 200 to 150 because a lot of the questions are going to be scenario based. The problem is that's about as much as we know. There's no additional help. There's no additional clarification on what the new exam will be like. The questions have to be like the ones that you're doing now, like the practice questions that we've got. So dropping the number of questions should not make it easier, and doing scenarios should not make it more difficult. The same rules have to apply. All they're doing is changing the format of the exam. They're not changing the objective, the goal, the strategy. Because we're very process-driven people, it has to be equally as fair this year than it was last year. So I really wouldn't worry or get obsessed about any minor changes they're doing to the structure of the exam. At this stage, you just need to focus on the advice that we've given you and worry about the change later. I think we'll find it's a very minor change, not noticed by most people. The question we haven't got asked is, you know, if there's 5 scenarios and 10 questions in each scenario, does that count as 5 questions or does it count as 50? I think ISACA is counting it as 5 questions, but in actual fact it'll be more like 50. In other words, I don't think the number of questions is actually going to change on the exam at all. I think it's going to be very similar to what we've received before. Folks, my name is Hanna. Please feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. If anybody needs CEPs for this web, are you going to give CPEs away for this webinar? Can I get some? If you need any continuing education points for this accreditation or other accreditations, if you email Everett at certification@isaca.ie, you will get accreditation points for this one. Okay? Apart from that, folks, you've still got loads of time. There's still time to do the revision and work, but there's only one thing that's going to pass this exam, and that's hard work. And you're up against it, because I know there are lots of other people doing that hard work. And I really do wish you luck. And I hope some of you, if you have any questions or comments, you can email certification@ie, or you can try to contact me on LinkedIn. But as traditional for me in all of these sessions, I'd like to close out by saying so long and thanks for all the fish. Bye, folks.